Hi, I'm Anas Rahman Junaid, founder and MD Hurun India. Today, I'm very happy to be in a discussion with Mr. Ashok Soota, founder Happiest Minds. He's best known for his brilliant stint in Sriram, in Wipro, then founding MindTree and now Happiest Minds. And now he's on to create another company called Happiest Health. Today, we're going to discuss Mr. Soota's entrepreneurship initiatives, his philanthropy, the way he sees how India is going to grow, the future opportunities, and so on. I welcome you all to join the discussion. Hi, sir. My first question to you is regarding the name. I'm sure you've explained in a lot of interviews about the genesis of the name and so on. My question is slightly different. How important is the right name for a business, right? Because I was having a debate with a startup founder the other day, and he was telling me, it's about the company and the culture. Even if you name a company Marshmallow, it works. But then you really believed in research, getting everybody's opinion. I just want to know your thoughts.
Sure. I can't say that the names all came from research.
Yeah.
MindTree came from the fact that we started with names from Name It.
Yeah.
And it's a very cerebral name when you look at it. Whereas Happiest Minds has come from the heart, if you will. And I didn't have too much time to decide the name. Happiness is a topic I was thinking about, applying my mind to it. And it seemed so logical when I started this, particularly because, one, it's a people business, so it was very important to get that across. Two, I do believe that a name must be memorable. If you can get a story behind it, it helps a lot more in terms of even its brand recognition. So rather than calling it IT this or IT that, this seemed like a very good choice.
Is it a big risk also in the sense you are saying Happiest Minds?
Well, for anything you could say there's a risk. So you have to look for the upsides. And that's really my philosophy.
Yeah.
And here, let's see the upsides. I'll give you the reaction of a customer of mine who said, I told my wife, this is a customer in America, I told my wife that I'm visiting a company called Happiest Minds today. And she said, oh, how nice, I wish I could come with you. You won't get that reaction otherwise. Secondly, for people, in fact, Prasenjit Bhattacharya, who's the Great Places to Work CEO in India and has been for many years, he told me, you created a problem for yourself, Ashok, because you suddenly set a bar and they'll be measuring you against that bar. I said, that's wonderful then, because we're not wanting to be measured against a low bar.
Yeah.
And then gradually that awareness comes, what you stand for, what you believe in, that you're really, in every respect, living by our mission statement, which is happiest people, happiest customers, the message gets across.
Okay. And then coming back to your journey in terms of you starting Sriram, then building, then working Wipro, then MindTree. Every step of the journey you had to break out of your comfort zone and do something, especially the last venture, Happiest Minds, you had to really come out of your comfort zone to start something new and it's quite daring. What drives you? What motivates you?
Yeah, but to start with, you talk of comfort zones.
Yeah.
Obviously, the biggest ones really came in the Wipro days because I was heading a company which was doing the manufacture and sales of compressors, diesel engines, water coolers. And then I moved into the computer world and not really IT as we know it now.
Yeah.
So it was a completely different industry. I can imagine that my colleagues were fairly skeptical about how this guy with a refrigeration background can come and run a computer company. That wasn't so difficult because there was one important commonality. And that is that in both the industries that I was, as well as in Wipro at that time, research and development played a very important part. We did our own design and development of computers in a closed market. Second one was manufacturing was a skill. The next transition actually came and was a bigger one for me within Wipro because I came in as president of Wipro Infotech. But in 1991, Premji, after 4 CEOs, also gave me the software business. And that was somewhat lucky. And that had a different rhythm, particularly since it was straight away a 100% export business for all practical purposes. And it required a different mindset, a different approach. So I'd say that was a bigger challenge in its own way. MindTree was an entrepreneurial venture and a very logical one. In a way, there was no real difference in the transitions I had to make because there was one key point in both, and that is you choose the change in the business and then that becomes your opportunity and you address that opportunity.
You touched upon working with Mr. Premji, and that really would take me to my next obvious question on philanthropy. And he's been topping the Hurun philanthropy list for the last few years. I'm very curious to know your philanthropy contribution. What are you doing, and what is the sort of cause that you're after in terms of supporting?
Sure.
Because philanthropy is essentially bridging the government funding through private donations.
Sure. It's partly that, but I would say it's also a question of achieving a mission.
Yeah.
Also, there's equally got its own mission. So I've had one philanthropic effort, which is called Ashirvadam, and which is really helping the needy. And that, you might say, is not too different from your concept of bridging a gap, And so it would help the needy, whether it is in education, in medical help, and so on. And some of the children have done remarkably well, gone on to graduate, get good jobs. And I had created that from some of the money I got when I sold my MindTree shares, which is now about 12 years ago. But SCAN, my medical research trust, is truly my mission at the moment. And when I'm saying it doesn't fund, it's not just bridging a gap, it's doing something completely new and different. It's 100% not-for-profit. It's looking at fundamental research in the private sector, which has never been done. And we've chosen aging and neurological as basic areas in which we will take up our projects. We take them up through consortium members. But what we've told the consortium members is that we're not a funding agency. We will contribute as members of the consortium to every one of those projects. And the area that we have decided to focus on is the gut microbiome. Specifically, the gut-brain axis linkage. And that, I think, is, nobody's really ever even thought of that in this country. And it's still research which is very fundamental and finding its way in the West. But if you look at it, you see so many neurological problems. And you may think they're all different, but there's a very big common linkage in them. And that is actually the same gut-brain axis linkage.
And do you collaborate with other philanthropists, especially in Bangalore? I know Chris Gopalakrishnan, he's very actively funds.
Yeah, but this doesn't have to be a collaboration. I guess everybody has its own mission, if you will. Philanthropy, there's the IPI, which is in fact spearheaded nationally across the country with Azim Premji. And certainly now the last 2.5 years have been somewhat idle in terms of not being able to get together as a group, and always interesting thoughts, ideas, presentations which come up. So that's been missing, but before that I would attend, and I look forward to their resuming. They typically have these sort of activities around November, by which time, I think the COVID clouds will all be away and we can enjoy the program.
Yeah, and next question is more from Indian context, right? The last decade or so, India growth has been fueled by internet penetration plus rising income levels, right?
Sure.
The next 10, 15 years, what do you think will help India grow? In the sense, we have this huge GDP targets of 10 trillion and so on, right?
Sure.
Is it going to be Web 3.0 or any specific tech?
Well, all the technologies are all interrelated. You can't say, will it be this or will it be that? Yeah. But technology is going to continue to be a major driver. And the good thing is that the pace of change of new technologies, if anything, is accelerating. AI as a whole is not anywhere near, let us say, becoming something standard and now it's going to get commoditized, because every day there's something more, and that's because the learning in AI continues. Then in the recent years, just look at it, you had first blockchain, then you had now AR and VR, that is augmented and virtual reality, and now you've got the metaverse. So all of these just keep unfolding, adding to the richness of the solutions, and each one of them creates opportunities in really a multiplicity of industries. So everything is getting techified, if you will. So there's edutech, there's fintech, there's real estate tech, everything or the other is being driven by technology. And the other aspect of it, really is of course the entrepreneurial energy in this country now. And I'm not talking about the unicorns. In fact, I have a slightly big reservation for anybody seeking to become a unicorn. And I'll explain that to you why later. But, it's amazing. I've just recently spoken at a NASSCOM event, and I asked the audience members how many of them are entrepreneurs or will become or would like to become. And I would say that 40% of the group put up their hands. But even more interestingly, I was addressing a group of class 10 to 12 students who come from all around the country, and the program was being held at Bethany out here. And I asked them, how many of you aspire to becoming entrepreneurs? And amazingly, 60 to 70% of them put up their hands. So it just shows there's this energy and enthusiasm. But if you want to come to unicorns, the reason I say it, of course, it's everybody would like to be a unicorn. That is why all these kids are also raising their hands, because they see that. But my belief on unicorns, there's no harm, except that if you're going to become a unicorn funded by, say, $400 million of cash, still losing $200 million on profitability, and a few years later choose to take your company public, and then find that on day one of listing, the price has dropped. And that you see happen, to my mind, I've not studied the numbers, but it must happen it's only happened so far for the larger guys who've gone public. But look at how many of them there are already. Pretty big names, and look at the amount of market capitalization lost, and who made money? Only the entrepreneur and the guys who funded them. All the others who came in later on have lost. So that's taking a lot of money away from the common man.
Somebody was telling me the other day, all the India's largest unicorns go to IPO and lose that status.
Luckily, it has not gone all the way going down, but because some of these entities which have gone public at close to $20 billion have more than half has been reduced. And therefore, everybody who came in at that time onwards has really lost.
What makes you think so differently? Your childhood, wherein we was doing some research and we found out you studied in 12 different schools. Has all that had an impact on the way you think?
Well, I suppose everything in your life has an impact. The first thing I think is we were 6 brothers and sisters. I think for me it was wonderful being in the middle. So I knew the eldest and the youngest pretty well, unlike the gap between the oldest and the youngest. And I think we learned a lot about sharing from a young age. So for me, the biggest thing is that I had the books that my elder sisters used to read, always in the house. And I took to reading them at a fairly young age. The other aspect actually of all the movement was, actually I think it taught me agility well before that word was invented. And the reason is I couldn't reach a school and say, look, I'm not going to be able to do this exam because you guys are teaching as you like it and I've been studying Henry V. Hey, you went there with 2 months to go and you read it all up and went and prepared for the exam. So it gave you a certain feel of agility. It's amazing how even today I have friends who go back to the time when I was in school in 8 or 9 years. I have this friend of mine and he said, hey, look, St. Peter's is celebrating its 175th year. I'm taking responsibility for the souvenir and the other things being brought out. So he wanted my profile, etc., amongst other things. And I said, hey, it's wonderful. I didn't know that because IIT Roorkee is also celebrating the 175th year. Now that helps. If I had grown up in the internet age, then by now I would have had 1,000 friends from that time. But still I have a nice, healthy, I would say, which adds up to easily 100 plus. From school and early college days.
And one of the reports that we put out is called the Impact 50 list, which is basically the list of top companies in India based on their alignment with the UN SDGs. And your company, right from the name, it's all about people and clients or employees.
Sure.
It's all about that. There's one specific pillar called SDG 5, which is about empowering women. Would love to know what all.
Sure. And firstly, we believe in diversity and inclusion, and we've been recognized on multiple fronts already on that score. See, the Great Places to Work has a specific thing for women, and we've been in the top 50 across all companies, not just the IT industry, for 3 years in a row. We won D&I Awards, Best Company in Asia. So there are multiple things that we've done there. This goes all the way to we're focusing on wellness and women's problems. Thought leadership by women. We've got, therefore, several of our leaders have got recognized. A person called Priya Kanduri, Preeti. They've all been recognized for their contributions towards thought leadership. Quite interestingly enough, out of my 3 independent directors, 2 of them are ladies. So there's a lot of focus. But there's no end to the programs we're doing. And I'd be happy to give you more information, which if you like, you could. Just choose to fit in as you want. And if you're okay, I'll give it to you straight away.
And in that context, what is your general comment on more participation of women in board? It's actually quite low in India. We did the analysis for India 500, the top 500 private companies. What are your general comment on that? And isn't it important that more women take leadership roles because that will have an impact on hiring women based on research, right?
So different aspects. I would say I mentioned to you two of our women leaders. I could also add Sharon Andrew, who's been our happiness evangelist and so key to literally symbolizing the name of the company. And I'd say that they're all on their paths towards, let's say, senior leadership positions beyond where they are today. So, there's a very defined program for their development, and we would like to be able to see them someday become very, very senior in the system with appropriate positions. So that's one aspect of it. I want to also briefly touch while we're at it. While we're growing towards improving our inclusivity in terms of gender, happiest minds, but in happiest health, we've begun with a ratio which is 50-50 from the word go almost. And maybe it's the nature of the industry. We have a lot of girls are very good content writers. You're seeing many of them today in media. Even when we do our media interviews, we find so many of them are women right there. We see this on TV channels. So they're well geared towards this, and therefore it wasn't difficult for us to end up with this ratio. Coming now to the board, of course it's important. I think women certainly think differently. So if you want diversity in thought, that also comes in. And other than that, I won't want to say, hey, we are doing this for this benefit or that benefit for ourselves. You have to get the best board members. And we were very fortunate when we got, two of our board members who, as I mentioned to you, are women. And the good thing is we've got 3 specific specializations in our board. And we will expand the board because it's not a very old board. So we have a total of 6 now, and in a while I'll probably add 2 more. So one is a professor of marketing. The other one is in charge, an expert in human capital as well as organization building. And the third is finance. So, wonderful functional specialization which has come together to create our board.
Next is a general topic on where the world is heading to. Can you give me your thought process? This is a very crucial week from a US standpoint, the jobs data.
Sure.
I just want to know how you are seeing all this, the opportunity or the challenges that the economy would go through in the next 2 years.
See, one thing I should tell you, first from the angle of the IT industry. I have seen one thing, that the demand for IT doesn't slow down when there's a global slowdown. In fact, in the old days, it used to be say, okay, then people are putting more into IT so that they could improve their productivity. Today, IT is being used to develop new businesses, new opportunities, gain market share. All these entrepreneurial startups which are coming out, how much percentage of their spend is IT from the word go. So the demand is not slowing down for IT at all. And then the issue is that, of course, we're all concerned about global growth. We wouldn't want it to be saying, hey, we're about the only industry which is growing. You do need a healthy environment. Barring obviously the certain impact largely more in Europe than anybody else because of the current unfortunate conflict, where it's amazing why Russia has chosen to do what it has done. The signs in America are really not that negative, if you look at it. After all, unemployment rates are still at the lowest levels. Then the concern everywhere is inflation. And that inflation is also very largely driven by 2 or 3 factors. One is, of course, fuel, and, Russia is suddenly actually being blocked in one side from its supplies, and then diverting it off to markets like China and so on and so forth, ourselves. And that has then created inflation in the rest of the world. And they chose it. I mean, let's be clear. They said, hey, we won't buy from you, but we'd be happy to buy your gas, which they have no options for. And then, of course, the grain shipments. That has really shot up the prices of wheat all over the world. If you have 2 or 3 major factors, and it's not surprising to really have inflationary forces in place when you come out of something like a pandemic. If you go back to history, you'll find it has always happened. So the numbers look alarmingly high for the West. For geographies which are used to 2 to 3% are now living with 8 and 9. I think in another year or 2, they'll all come under control.
Great. I think next question is, what will be your advice to young individuals who want to start something, and what will your advice be to slightly older individuals?
So, obviously there are more opportunities in the world than there have ever been before. So it's a wonderful time to be young. My advice to anybody would be, you don't need to rush into entrepreneurship. There are many people who are doing it. It's far better to build organizational experience, know how to run an organization. And then also, as you acquire a bit of that capability, you're able to raise funds rather than trying to bootstrap. The problem with all these youngsters is that most of them are bootstrapping. And then that becomes a very tough job. It's well worth it to go larger. faster, because it's easier running a large company than a small company. And you don't know where the competition is going to come from. So therefore, you may as well acquire scale very quickly. To that extent, if someone had at least, say, 10 years of experience and demonstrated capability, they'd find it easier to raise funds. For older people, I would say whatever you want to do is never too late. So you don't feel that now I've got to start hanging up my boots. I believe that keeping yourself mentally occupied and engaged is as important as keeping yourself physically engaged. So one is exercise for the mind and the brain, and the other is obviously exercise to keep yourself well and healthy.
Mine, I'm a bootstrap company, so I always, one of the questions I think
Yeah, but then, you were not seeking to, you see, in a very focused space.
Yeah.
You're not a typical thing of now getting into the brave new world of e-commerce and another logistics guy and another, you see that?
Next is, I'm going to ask you some quick questions. It's a rapid fire kind of question, but
Okay.
very simple. First is, which is your most favorite kind of experience? Is it Wipro or Shriram, MindTree or Happiest
Sure.
Minds? Which is your favorite?
So I've always told people that, firstly, the biggest challenge even today, I would say, was Shriram Refrigeration.
Yeah.
But I tell people that Wipro was happy, MindTree was happier, and Happiest Minds is the happiest. Now, I've got another happiest to talk about from here, Happiest Health. So I can't improve on that in terms of superlatives.
Cool, yeah. And who, out of this whole journey of yours, who's had the happiest minds? Is it your clients, employees, or your family?
See, I'll tell you one thing. Our mission statement is happiest people, happiest customers. And in my view, you can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
So we believe that happiest people lead to happiest customers. And I think that gets demonstrated over and over again. So I wouldn't make that distinction. And therefore, I think that's a bit of a false question.
Okay.
It's not an either or. And the same with family. You can't say that you're happy in the workspace but not happy at home or the other way around. Because today life has become one integrated whole anyway.
Is your family, does it support you?
Oh yes. Sometimes question why I'm doing so much more, particularly of late, which is not surprising because if you really look at it, after Happiest Minds, I've done both Scan
Yeah.
as well as Happiest Health in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So it is higher, but one thing has led to the other. It's not that I said, hey, I must. Scan was a part of my plan. But it's when I began researching Scan that I realized there's a need for all the knowledge that comes out in the research world to reach the common man much earlier. The common man gets aware of those developments when something comes out in the form of a drug. You don't need that. There are so many ways which you can do to improve and manage your problems, kinder, gentler therapies. And people need to know about. That is what led to the creation of Happiest Health.
And one entrepreneur of the current generation, young generation, who you like and who you are impressed with?
See, I don't know these youngsters that well.
Yeah.
I must say this. But I will tell you, though, I was very impressed. I should talk about this NASCOM program that I won't pick up an individual. I was impressed at the quality of the work being done. I was also impressed that a number of them have been able to raise money, not large sums, because in the IT world, typically they tended to bootstrap when that was happening. So people are seeing the value in it. And the third thing is, I was seeing so much absolutely genuine research-oriented work and innovation-oriented work being done in the biotech space, which is a hot space. And I'm also then surprised when I go out. I told you at Cochin, 2 youngsters I met out there, both ladies, by the way, and asked them, what are you doing? I'm going to join college in biology, said one, biotech, said the other. So I think identifying spaces like that, where there are opportunities and an ability to contribute.
And one entrepreneur in the previous generation which comes on top of your mind?
Well, again, it's very difficult to single out. I think Premji was an excellent entrepreneur because I think the standards of corporate governance that were followed at Wipro were truly dear to my own heart, because even in my prior 19 years, I'd worked in companies which had a very high standard of corporate governance. But everybody has strengths. I would say I have personally tried to say, hey, what were the strengths that I could have picked up the best from my first chairman, who is Dr. Charitram, no longer there. Premji was a different type of person altogether, but he had different strengths altogether. And maybe over a period of time, these are the only 2 people I worked with while I was growing up. And I think if I could even pick up the best of both of them, to my mind, that could have then contributed to making me a better person and a better leader, a better manager.
And which sector is the sector of future according to you? I heard you mention in an interview that we should have more manufacturing billion-dollar companies in India. So from that standpoint, Blockchain, green energy, or SaaS, or which is your?
Well, so none of these that you mentioned is going to lead to manufacturing. If we could get a manufacturing unicorn, I'd encourage it all the way.
Green energy could lead to.
Green energy, of course, absolutely, because there's a lot of good, sensible investments there. And there's some wonderful work going on in that area also. So green energy, certainly. Then on a manufacturing front, when you look at the opportunities in robotics and drones, forgetting semiconductors, which one way or the other it looks like maybe the government will address. But it's because it's so crucial and because it should have been done 30 years ago. And maybe it'll get done now. And even then I'm a little skeptical. But at least the efforts are there. But look at these other industries. There's so much requirement. And they should be planned on a larger scale. In fact, just this morning I happened to have met a person who's doing a robotic-based medical device. But they're again struggling on a small-scale basis. Entities like this could be made much larger if they could draw the right amount of funds.
Yeah. And it's difficult to get hardware funding for hardware.
Exactly. Well, because the easy money goes into services.
I hope that changes after this cycle.
Yeah.
What is the book that you're reading right now?
Which is the book I really like.
I'm reading now.
I'm reading now.
I know, but you like also, both you can
see, I'll tell you what I'm reading. I'm doing an enormous amount of reading, but it's all linked to scan at the moment.
Okay.
So I'm reading enormous amount of stuff linked to, say, the gut microbiome, but that's not the sort of stuff you want to hear about. I always love to talk about a book called Wellsprings. It's written by a Jesuit priest. It's not a religious book, but a spiritual book. And the very first exercise, which is called the conclusion, I think gives you more knowledge about yourself than anything else I've ever read and has influenced me. So I took the book with me on a vacation to Lakshadweep.
When what age?
No, this must have been in 1991 that I went there, okay? And I did the exercise very thoroughly over maybe 7 or 8 handwritten sheets of foolscap paper, and I kept revisiting it. And for example, at that time, it asked, what are your unfulfilled desires? And I wrote down to become an entrepreneur and to write a book. And surprisingly, then it took me another 15 years to fulfill both those. But I knew that there were unfulfilled wishes even then. And that came down because I recorded it, remembered it, and then finally acted on it.
Amazing. I think those are my set of questions.
Sure.
And I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Anas. I enjoyed speaking to you also.
Thank you.